Hi, everyone. Welcome to the UFOhub live stream. And today's guest is going to be Patrick Andries, as you all know. He's the author of Owner's Manual for the Mind and co-author of Naked in Public, Dream Symbols Revealed. And he has co-written that book with Catherine. That's his wife. And I'm glad he was able to be on today. As you all know, and I guess I'll go over it a little bit, if for some reason, and I'm sure Patrick will be surprised too, because I totally forgot to cover this with him. But if for some reason the stream just ends, that just means I got my text from my wife and it's time for baby. So, but for right now, we've had a whole bunch of false alarms. So we'll just keep it going however long it takes. So anyway, I don't have necessarily anything else to cover with you all. Next week, I'm hoping to obviously get another guest to cover Fridays, and Wednesdays, as always, we have open lines. So please join Telegram, find the UFO Hub group, and simply call in and share your story. Everyone else always likes to listen to other people's experiences, and I do as well. So don't be afraid to call in, and we'll just have some fun and hang out online. But for now, let me bring in Patrick. Patrick, welcome. Thanks for being on.
Hi. Thanks, Adnan. Glad to be here.
Well, Patrick, it's since the last time. It's been a while since I interviewed you in person last time. So that was at the Ozark conference, I believe, or was it the Transformation conference?
Yes, it was the Transformation Conference, I believe, and we were talking about our dream book.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, thanks for being on today. And I figured we can talk about both these books. And I'm sorry to say, and I actually say this to everyone that I interview, I'm not fully in detail. I don't have all the full detailed information about their books. And you were mentioning something about Atlantis. I was like, ooh, we can talk about that too.
Oh
So
yeah,
I figured, just for sake of somebody new listening, if you could go a little bit into your background information, how did you get started with this? How did you get into these different metaphysical subjects? And we'll take it from there.
sure. Well, I mean, I think like a lot of people, I've always been interested in how the universe works. And when I was younger, I started really thinking about, how I could better myself and kind of reach like a really peak level of being able to do things. And so I started thinking about how I could develop my mind. And eventually that led me into metaphysics. I met some people in college who got me turned on to metaphysics. And so that led me to a school that actually specialized in teaching metaphysics. I was looking for something pretty comprehensive. And so I studied all these different disciplines. I mean, everything from the yogis to the Buddhists, it's the whole gamut of metaphysics. And learned a lot of different techniques during that time and was focused on really applying the information, not just talking about it and learning about the different theories, but really applying it. So, I was spending a lot of time meditating, developing my abilities, and learning how to do energy healing and even astral projection and things like that. And I can talk a little bit more about that as we get into it in terms of those experiences and what that helped me build. But it really built a good foundation for me so that when I met Catherine, we started talking about our own school and some of the things that we would do if we had created our own school. So we eventually actually became married and started our own school, which was called the School of Intuitive Arts and Sciences, which we ran out of Chicago for about 11 years. And then we moved everything online and uh, let go of the building and everything so that we didn't have the overhead and we'd be a little bit more portable because we were looking to be able to move around more. And we had a daughter, so we were wanting to be able to do more family things and do things with her. So we moved into the intuitive school, which actually is intuitiveschool.com now. And so we can offer services to people anywhere around the world. And Catherine is really more into the readings and things than I am. She does the astrology and the numerology and palmistry, things like that. And I'm more into the metaphysical skills. So I am more into like the energy healing, meditation, visualization, and a little bit more on that track. So we complement each other really well. That we both bring our own expertise to what we're doing, but they blend really well together because we have a lot of common interests and commonalities in what we do. So that's what we've been doing. Here, we're now in the Kansas City area. And the latest thing that we started about 2.5 years ago now is our radio show, which is Spirit's Journey. That's on One is Talk Radio and Truth Frequency Radio, along with 8 other stations. And so, it's been great meeting all these fantastic people. And that's something that we do that's every Saturday now at 1 p.m. Central Time on One Is Talk Radio or Truth Frequency Radio.
Patrick, that sounds great. I'm glad you guys were able to work it out. So I wanted to, I guess, do you want to maybe get into a little bit about the owner's manual for the mind, and how did you come about to wanting to write that book?
Sure. Well, I had done health coaching for many years, and I always had people asking me for more. They wanted something they could take home. And so I started thinking about what was the basis really of everything that we did and thought about, well, what would our life be like if we'd been given an owner's manual, just like when you get a new television or something like that, if there's anything that you don't know how to do, you can just go look it up in the manual. And so that was kind of the idea with the owner's manual for the mind, is thinking about all the things that we need to do to learn how to be a spiritual being in our physical life experience. And the foundation of that really begins in the idea that we are beings of light and energy. We're not these physical beings that just have a physical existence, and once this body dies, then we just blink out of existence. This is a huge paradigm shift, but it's not something that is so foreign to people's way of thinking, because just about every religion is based on some kind of a concept that we continue to exist after we die. And many of them even have some kind of an idea that we existed even before we were born into this life. And the main differences I find usually come in whether or not people believe that we come back here again after this life, or whether it's just a one and done kind of experience. But there is this sense of continuity, and it's really exploring that continuity. That's what the book is really about. And so I start off with the basics, and it's really intended to be something that a beginner could wrap their mind around, as well as somebody that has a little bit more experience in their life, so that they can see the deeper messages and deeper meanings if they're more experienced, or if they're just getting started. It's all the basics that you need. And so, for example, I believe that concentration is probably one of the most important first steps, because everything that we do in terms of experiencing ourselves as a spiritual being and developing that perception, so that we know we're a spiritual being and we know we are energy and that we are eternal, and we can let go of all this attachment to being in our physical form that we often carry with us. Is the most important thing is concentration, because our conscious mind is just always at us. There's all these thoughts that are distracting us from our true perceptions of who we are. And so we need to be able to quiet those down so that we can listen for that inner guidance, that inner um, sense that we are a spiritual being and that there's more to us than just what's going on in the physical world. And then from there, meditation, I don't believe is a means to an end. It's the essence of connecting to that part of ourselves. And so again, once that mind is quiet, the conscious mind is quiet, then we can start to peer into the depths of our consciousness and get into those deeper levels. And so meditation is really the vehicle for that. I believe that meditation really is, it's akin to sleep. Sleep, I think, is the unconscious sort of mandatory counterpart to meditation. But everything that we do while we sleep, I believe that ultimately part of our destiny and our evolution is to consciously be able to take control of that process and to be able to guide our own evolution and our growth and our development into the future. And so then the rest of them, all revolve around that. Visualization is our ability to create with our mind, because that is my belief and experience that ultimately, as beings of energy and because of our eternal nature, we are creators. And inherently, our mind is set up so that as we focus on an object or an image, we will tend to draw that into our life. And I believe that quantum mechanics have a lot to do with that, because quantum mechanics is all about probabilities. And one thing I've realized through working with visualization and studying quantum mechanics deeper is that visualization is really a process of shifting the probabilities slightly in our favor. And it doesn't take a big shift, it's just this slight shift. And then we draw those resources to us, the people that we need, whatever it is, the energy that we need for healing, whatever it is that we need in that moment. As we focus on those things, we shift those probabilities and we draw that to us. There's a lot of metaphysical teachers call that the law of attraction. And so the universal laws is actually part of that. And as I mentioned, Atlantis, you talked about that earlier. And that's actually a little bit about our history, because Atlantis is really about who we were when we first came to this planet. And I know this is the UFO hub, And so I'm sure there's probably a lot of discussion about ETs, but one of the interesting things is that at one point we were actually the ETs. We were coming to this planet because as spiritual beings of light and energy, we weren't indigenous to this planet. We actually came to this planet. And when the life forms that were here evolved to a point that were able to accommodate us, then we started taking on physical form. And so that's kind of this whole idea that's been wrapped up in humanity for thousands and thousands of years, is the fact that we do have this physical part of ourselves, but then we are also a soul. We have this soul that's infused in the body, and that's that energy of who we are as these eternal beings of light and energy. And so, that's what the book is all about, and I believe that's what our life purpose and our path is all about, is coming to terms with that and learning how to be fully aware of it and express it.
Well, Patrick, I don't know if it's a bit too early to get into this now, but do you want to cover more about the Atlantis subject?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's a
Okay.
very interesting subject. And it isn't something that I believed in initially, and in fact, reincarnation wasn't even something I was really brought up with. So it was something that, as I encountered it, I just kept my mind open. I didn't dismiss it just because it wasn't something that I was originally taught. I kept my mind open for evidence, and as the evidence started to mount, I started putting more credibility into it. And a lot of that evidence for me came in the form of readings. Initially, it was mainly the intuitive readings, the past life readings in particular. The school where I was teaching, we did past life readings and health readings, and they were kind of similar to the way Edgar Cayce did them, although they had learned that process of how he did it, even though he was never really able to teach that and pass it on. He did kind of set the model for that, and so they were able to model after what he did. And it was really interesting to me, the information that came up, because it wasn't like what you typically hear sometimes when people are talking about going to somebody, and they always come out they were somebody famous. And there's only so many famous people to go around, right? So we couldn't all be famous, right? And people often would say, well, what about the farmers and the merchants and just regular old people?
Right.
And the interesting thing was, all these past life readings that we were doing, that's exactly what was coming up. It wasn't anything extraordinary, and in fact, the few times when I did hear past life information coming out that was somebody famous, it actually withheld the name a lot of times, because it would say, there's a concern, that this individual may, let their ego kind of get a little out of whack if they knew who they were. But it is important for them to know how powerful they are, and how capable they are, and things like that. So it's very interesting the way that it came out, and the consistencies, and just hundreds of people um, getting direct information that was relevant to their life, and they could recognize how it was relevant. And they could see those patterns repeating themselves and stuff like that, so that they could break out of it. So during this process, some people would go so far back that they would actually go back to the time period of Atlantis. And so we would start compiling some research on that. And then all of this research, Catherine and I did, even after we created our own school. And so what comes out is that there were actually four different periods of Atlantis, and they are often referred to as cycles. And so, just like when the Earth makes one revolution around the sun, that could be considered a cycle. And so the birth and kind of ending of a level of civilization, that could be considered like a cycle in a larger sense. And so Atlantis actually covered about four cycles, and the third and the fourth cycles were where the technology became the most advanced. And that's what most people think of when they think of Atlantis. They think of very advanced technology, but every cycle was not that way. And there was even some souls or energy beings, however you want to describe it, who came in before Atlantis. And so my understanding, even though this is a little bit more unclear, but Lemuria and Mu, I believe, are kind of two different ways of describing that time period. And so a lot of those people came in, and as we were coming into these physical bodies, we were struggling to figure out how everything was working. And so a lot of us would make mistakes as you're experimenting. You can expect mistakes are going to be made. And so people would get trapped in the body. And that's kind of how we all got into this cycle, is that each of us had some kind of a thought or a belief that formed at some point that led us to believe that we couldn't get out, that we couldn't come and go as we pleased. And so that's where sometimes this idea of original sin comes from, because sin is actually a Greek word. It came from the Greek translation of the original text, and it literally is an archery term that means that you missed the mark. And so literally it's just a way of saying you made a mistake. You made an error and you need to correct for that error. And so there wasn't this big, heavy guilt trip that was intended with the idea of sin. And so when we're originally talking about original sin, that's actually where we came in during the time of Atlantis, because most everybody that's alive today was probably around during the time of Atlantis. And so when we came in and we had that belief that formed. Think about like some of the ideas that you may have formed about yourself, even this lifetime, that you're not good enough, or you're not capable, or I'm not smart. We have these big lies that we tell ourselves, and maybe were told to us by somebody, and we believed it. And so it's kind of like that, only on a bigger scale. It was some kind of an idea that we had that, I can't create, or I can't free myself from the physical. So with that, when we study the time period of Atlantis, it takes us back to that very core idea that we formed that was erroneous. It's a lie in a lot of ways. It's a lie we told ourselves, or you could call it a mistake or a misunderstanding, but it's something that we created within our own mind that held us here and trapped us and got us caught up in this whole cycle of coming back again and again and again. And there's nothing wrong with coming back. It's not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that we're beings of eternal energy. And so we're not intended to just be stuck in a cycle here like this. And fortunately, we are eternal. So, getting caught in a loop for a little bit isn't really going to hurt us too bad. But ultimately, our spiritual destiny is to learn how to move past whatever that idea was, that block that we created. And then we would be free again to travel the universe. That's our birthright, is to be able to go wherever we want. And that's where sometimes people say after you die, well, what happens if you evolve to the point where you don't have to come back? Well, you can go anywhere. And that's literally the case. And so when we're talking about ETs coming to visit the Earth, there may be physical beings that are more advanced than where we are physically right now. But in a lot of ways, we are those ETs, because like I said, we weren't native to this planet. So we came here during the time of Mu, or Lemuria, or Atlantis. And so during those times, it's our destiny to kind of get to that point where we can start traveling the stars again. In some ways, I almost think that this is almost like a little timeout for us, because since we kind of developed these misunderstandings of the universe and how everything works. You've probably noticed how some people treat each other. They're not
Mhm.
always nice to each other, right?
Right.
And so if you could imagine unleashing that on the whole galaxy, it's almost like
The dysfunctional beings.
exactly. So it's almost like this is a little playpen for us, like you corral your kids. You have kids, so you know what I'm talking about. It's like you
Yep.
sort of corral them in a safe area where they can play with their stuff, but they can't get into sticking their fingers into the light sockets and stuff like that. So it's like you don't want them to hurt themselves, right? So
Right.
I think that's part of our learning process, and I hope that doesn't sound too condescending, but we're all there, right? So it just indicates that on a spiritual level that we are these spiritual children that are growing and learning and waking up to our true power, our true potential, because as undisciplined as so many people's minds are, and I can't claim to be, enlightened or anything like that because I'm here with everybody else, even though I've done a lot of work along those ways. So, hopefully I can see some of my, um, spots I need to work on. But at the same time, if you could create anything in an instant that you thought about, just think about all the chaos that would be happening because people's minds are so undisciplined. They would just be going off with all their fears. That's probably one of the biggest dangers, I guess, to us with our minds is all these fears. They're afraid of getting a disease. So they're actually creating disease in their body, or they're holding on to anger. They're holding a grudge against somebody, and they're thinking that all their anger is going to hurt the other person, but it's really all that energy gets turned back on them, and all that self-hatred and stuff might lead to cancer, all these diseases that develop in the body as a result of these thoughts and these attitudes that are being held on to over a period of time. Those are all learning experiences. Those are gauges, so that when we see what our mind is creating, it gives us an opportunity to change that. That's what Atlantis was all about. We were doing all this experimentation, and we even this physical form. That's why this body is so different than the other primates, because we tweaked it during that time. So the body that we originally came into, it was much more primitive than our current form. And so with our mind and through an understanding of science at that time in a different way, the energies that we were using were very different than what we have now. The technologies that we were using back then were very different. I'm very curious whether we could even still use the same technologies now that we used back then, just because the energy of the world is so different, just because of the collective energy of humanity. I mean, there's so many people that are in this heavy, dark place, and there's a lot of other people that are in a much better, lighter place. So we're battling it out, kind of in some ways, and hopefully, reaching a balance. That's really the ideal, where we can um, get to a point where we're all growing and evolving. And so the technology and everything back then, hopefully it will come back, because there was some really cool technology that we had back then that was crystal based, and working with the energies and how it would resonate through the crystals. And we've just barely scratched the surface. There are some things that we use now. I mean, like obviously lasers use crystals, and there's other applications and things like that. So we have our technology kind of working in a different vein than we had back then. But one of the things that was very advanced in a lot of ways was genetic manipulation. And so there was a lot of work to perfect this form, to get it into a physical form that was considered pleasing and attractive, but also would serve our purposes, because we needed a very large brain to be able to hold all of the energy of our intellect from an energetic standpoint. And so the brain is really kind of like an interface, just like your computer in a way. So you sit down and your computer has all this computing power, but it's nothing without the user. It needs somebody to input. And so
Right.
our soul, our spiritual being, that is us, the truer sense of us, even though this is us too. This is like an extension of us, kind of like your car. And so you get in, you drive it around, and you interact in the physical world. And I used to think of the five senses as being gateways to the physical world so that we could perceive. But now, after I've studied just how much information is out there that we filter out, we're only taking in just a tiny fraction. I think it's just as true to say that our five senses are filters. It's filtering everything down to just the essence of what we want to focus on. And so the whole thing is just fascinating when you get into it. I mean, so many things that are happening now are repeating what we went through and what we experienced during the time period of Atlantis. I mean, for example, people often hear about the fall of Atlantis. And so, especially the third and the fourth periods, there were major shifts that led to an end to that time period for us. And unfortunately, it was partly due to the struggle between the people in Atlantis who felt like, well, the physical world is just ours for the taking. We are the dominant being, and so we have a right to just come in and use everything to the fullest for our learning. And so it was kind of like, using resources and using them up and taking advantage of what's here. And so there's a lot of that very materialistic mentality that echoes even today. You can still hear those same refrains again and again. You look at our technology now, where we're just stripping resources out of the earth without concern for renewing the area, taking care of the environment, making sure that the earth is healthy and whole, and making sure that our technologies are not causing harm, not only to ourselves, but to the environment, realizing that this is our home. And, there isn't another planet that is really suitable for this physical form that is anywhere close and convenient for us to move to. So it's not like we can just get up and move somewhere if we mess this place up, and it would be a shame. I mean, it's such a beautiful planet, and we've built so much here over the millennia that we've been here. We need to learn from those lessons and start reinvesting in healing the planet, because that was one of the things during the downfall of Atlantis. There were those who were very spiritually aware, and some of them were being accused of being arrogant, because of their awareness, but they were tapped in. And possibly, it could be true that they let some arrogance get in there too, because again, everybody had their own lessons, their own learning. But then, there were those who, were like I said, kind of more physically oriented, and so there was this struggle between spiritual and physical energies, and that's kind of what we're seeing now. We have that same dichotomy of people who are more spiritually aware. They're reaching for that spiritual truth and existence and awareness, and then there are those who are denying it and just choosing to shut it out, or maybe they would be open to being aware of the spiritual energies, but they just don't know how. They don't feel capable, and they're just distracted by all these things, their own mind, and all this technology. I mean, look at our technology, how distracting it is. We've got these phones that are constantly keeping us notified of every little insignificant thing that doesn't really make any difference to us. you know and that's part of what they're designed for. It's like they get paid to keep you looking at things. If you can look at the app, or look at the ads, they get more money for every view. So they're trying to get their viewership up on your phone the same way that television companies have been doing for decades. They're trying to increase their viewership. The more viewers they have, the ratings go up. The more their ratings go up, the more money they get for advertising. So it's all tied to the dollar, and when you're getting free ads, free apps with ads, basically it's just like you're carrying around a mini television in the palm of your hand, and they're getting paid to keep you engaged. So it's there's so many aspects of Atlantis that are coming full circle that we're experiencing again. I mean, even atomic energy, for example, we have the technology now, basically to, beat us back down to the Stone Age again. And that's kind of what happened during Atlantis, is the technology, basically was turned against humanity, and caused a lot of cataclysmic shifts in the earth at that time. Not all of the endings of the cycles were man-made, but I believe two of them were, and I think two of them were like natural occurrences. But even the natural occurrences, if you look at the broader scope of our minds as creative beings, we can't extricate ourselves from the energy of the planet, because we are always influencing the planet everywhere we go. So I know that was kind of a long explanation. I'll give you a moment here, if you have any questions, you want to explore any directions there, but hopefully that was a good primer.
That was great. I just, like I always do, I just let the guests talk, and, just let everyone hear what they have to say, because it's, I'm not the main focus of the show. But anyway, but no, you've given me quite a few that I want to ask you about, but I want to actually cover something real quick first for you and for
Sure.
everyone else watching. There's a huge thunderstorm going through right now, and I'm just like sitting there going like, please no power outage, please no power outage. So besides the baby thing, if the power goes out, there could also be the thunderstorm. So please just bear
Okay.
with me. So with that, kind of out of the way, write down any questions that you might have for Patrick. As you know, we're going to do a Q&A later. And so write them down, post them with before you ask the question with the three little stars, and so that way I know you're directing the question towards the guest. And so any questions you might have, don't worry. Most likely, I take the time to make sure to get as many people answers as possible. But Patrick, one of the things you were talking about, which was very interesting about being more disciplined about how we go about our existence and knowing what influence we have as being as creators. Because if you look around in the world that it is now, and if you consider that a created world by the creator, by source, God, whatever you want to call it, I'm glad it's very stable and not constantly just shifting and changing in weird ways to
Yeah.
where it would just be so discombobulated where we would not be able to function or have any kind of society. It's like there's still everything functions just right. Crease created, creating air, there's earth, there's, all these things that we can wake up next morning and know it's still there and will still work the way we need it to work. So anyway,
Right.
just wanted to make a quick comment about that. But regarding the different technologies, were you able to can you maybe talk a little bit about that? If you have any information about, besides just crystals, was there any particular specific application that were used that you can maybe could draw some parallels that we're about around this, using them in similar ways, or or not?
So it's interesting. We've done some exploration of the technology at the time, and we know that it was, I believe, in the third cycle we did develop some means of air travel because it was actually pretty interesting. We had some past life readings where it would come up, somebody, I recall one of the first times, actually died in an accident. So it was a flying machine of some kind, and the person actually crashed, and that's how they withdrew from that lifetime. And so there was actually a means to power something to be able to take flight. And the description was that all of the energy and the power sources were crystalline based, and so there was some method that we had at that time to actually harness energy from the earth, or it was either from the earth or from basically all the space around us, or maybe a combination of both. And
Would you
so
call that the
the
ether?
yeah, I mean, the ether, the way it was originally described, that was disproven just because of they were intending for that to be a means for light waves to travel. But I usually call it the akasha, or cosmic energy. Those are two ways I usually refer to it. But yeah, the ether is another way people refer to that. And so, it's kind of interesting. It's one of those things where science sort of, um, you know, dissuaded people from looking into that. But then as you come back to it again, it turns out, well, maybe there was something more to that. And I think that in physics, when they're looking into dark energy and dark matter, I think that that's probably the first signs where maybe they're seeing some effects or some existence of something beyond this physical world that we're in. And so I believe that that's really going to probably lead us into that multidimensional realm where we're talking about akasha. And so when I first encountered akasha, it was when I was meditating. So as I was going deeper and deeper into my own consciousness, then I started to experience these energies and light and things like that. And as I started talking to people about it, they said, "Yeah, that's the cosmic energy or the akasha." And then with the energy healing, again, that came back because uh, when the cosmic energy comes into the body, then we often call that cosmic life force or just life force. Other um, you know, cultures have called it different things like chi or ki or ka. So there's different ways that people have referred to it, but throughout all these different cultures, there's been this recognition of this energy in the cosmos, and then we are able to bring that into our body and channel it through giving it direction. You know, it responds to the direction of our mind, and that's really the key. And so even when we're visualizing to create something, in a way, that's exactly what we're doing, is that we create an image in our mind, and then that image becomes kind of magnetic, almost like it starts drawing that cosmic energy to that image, and that image becomes a blueprint, and that blueprint then begins to develop, and then it eventually comes out into our life. So I think that that was somehow the basis of this technology and how it worked. And so I didn't get the impression that there was a lot of physical circuitry like what we would think of it now. And again, like I said, our current experience is very, very entrenched in physicality. And so every little thing that we do, you know, it has to be laid out physically. There needs to be a physical circuit, a physical wire, you know, connecting to get the current and things like that. But I believe that during the time of Atlantis, that we had these crystals, and I think we actually would give them direction non-physically. So I don't know if maybe there was somebody whose job was to kind of guide the direction of the crystal, or if there was some other means of doing that. But if you imagine the crystal growing and then having kind of a blueprint to follow as it grows, you know, then the crystal would grow and be able to fulfill that function. And so these crystals were really more like amplifiers, where they would amplify the energy, and then the energy could be directed for different things, whether it was lighting a house, or whether it was, you know, powering this flying machine of some kind. And so we were trying to get some better descriptions of the flying machine, because obviously everybody's, you know, ears perked up, and we're like, wow, that's interesting, that's cool. And so we're trying to find out more information about it. And so from what we understand, it was sort of like a hovercraft. It was made out of wood. You know, a lot of the early airplanes were made out of wood, you know, before we started working with metals and things like that. And so I didn't get the impression that they probably got as big or had as much power as what we would think of now as an airplane. You know, I don't recall hearing anything where, you know, there were huge airliners back then where hundreds of people would be on the plane at one time, or whatever they called it. But the way it was described, it was almost like a hovercraft, where it would create like an air pressure underneath it, where it would get lift, and it was made out of wood, so it was pretty lightweight. And obviously, it was big enough. I'm not sure exactly how many people could ride in one at one time, but obviously, it had enough power. You know, it would take a tremendous amount of power to get airborne. And so, you know, that they did exist. And the other thing that I got the impression of with the technology is that for the most part, it seemed like the technology was very clean. Like there wasn't a lot of pollution and things like that that were created. I mean, you can imagine the energy being transmitted through these crystals, that you know, there would be no pollution. And so that was definitely probably a plus. One of the things that did happen, and this is kind of what I was talking about in terms of people kind of messing with things and kind of causing problems, that there was a crystal that was used to kind of amplify feelings. You know, so there would be like all these like positive energies, you know, what were considered positive energies at that time, that were being almost like broadcast, sort of like a radio station or something like that. And so the idea was it was supposed to help improve people's lives. And so, you know, these positive energies were being put out there, and you know, it uplift people as they encountered all these energies. And so probably worked really well for who knows how long. And then, you know, somebody got in there and started messing with it, and I don't know if it was maliciousness or just kind of reckless experimentation, or you know what the reason was, but they got in there and started experimenting to see what would happen, if they shifted the frequencies and stuff. And so, started creating some chaos, and things like that. And another thing that apparently we were pretty advanced in, as I mentioned, was genetic modification. So,
I was
as I
also going to
mentioned, we were
ask you about
working.
that.
Yeah, yeah. So part of that was directed toward perfecting our own physical form, which is why, even though we can trace the lineage of these bodies back to the primates, we are obviously very different than primates. And even the not archaeologists, but anthropologists, when they're trying to trace back humanity, they know that there was a bottleneck at some point. There was a very small group of people that make up all of humanity as we exist today. And so it's interesting because the geneticists and the anthropologists, there's a lot of kind of agreement coming to this point that there was sort of this bottleneck. So it does really kind of give credence to this idea that this form was perfected at some point and then sort of nurtured and propagated, so that this would be our vehicle that we would use at that point. The brain obviously has a lot of capacity for our intellectual growth and development, and the fingers, have a lot of fine motor skills, and so the opposable thumb, that's a big you know innovation, I guess you can consider it, that allowed us to have a lot of fine motor skills. So if you think about this physical form, it is really ideal for our creativity because we need fine motor skills to be able to create things. Obviously, we are not one of the fastest animals on the planet. We're very slow. In fact, we probably made a lot of good meals back in the day. So it's amazing that our species even got off the ground at all, because in terms of going toe to toe with just about any animal in the wild, we are inferior physically. What allowed us to propagate was our intellect. And I believe that a lot of that, the reason why our intellect is so far beyond anything else on this planet, is because we are these spiritual beings of energy and light. We came into these bodies. And so we were imbued with this spark of creativity. I mean, you look at everything we do, and every single thing that we do has this essence of creativity, creation. I mean, creation is our thing. That's what we do with our mind. And so we needed a vehicle that would help us express our creative talents, in a physical world. And so this body was intended to be a vehicle to allow us to do that. And so, some of those things that might be mythological creatures could have actually been experiments maybe that were done at that time, because from a lot of the information that we have, it seems like we were pretty advanced in that way. That again, if you think about, if we had a very powerful recognition of being able to create with our mind, that we could probably focus energy in certain areas to make adjustments to our DNA. And so, some of these things that kind of grew up to be mythological creatures, they could have actually been experiments that were done at that time. Some of them considered maybe not failures, but maybe just not the way we wanted to go, combining different animals together, things like that. And again, like I talked about with full circle, we are right back to that same place, that we now have the human genome completely mapped out, and people are getting ready to start making all these changes, and debating, is this right, should we do this, how far should we go. There's people who are cautioning restraint, and then there's other people who just say, turn me loose and let me, do what I can. And so it's that same kind of mentality, that when you have scientific exploration with this very physical consciousness, that everything is just physical, and we can just get in here and manipulate whatever we want without any concern for the consequences. There, it is kind of like this reckless abandon, and that's part of the same thing that got us into trouble during Atlantis. It's like some of those experiments didn't go well. We had feedback from some of the readings that people um, ended up deformed and different things like that from experiments gone wrong. And so there were problems. It wasn't that Atlantis was all just all these happy experiences. I mean, if you think about it, we got trapped during that time, and so obviously that was one thing that didn't go exactly the way we planned it. And so there's a lot of parallels in terms of the lessons. And it was an early time of our kind of sojourn into the physical world. So I think there were probably more people at that time who were aware of where we came from and what our birthright is. But then over time, as people became trapped in this physical cycle and we came back for lifetime after lifetime, those memories became more difficult to reach. And so they're still there. I mean, that's who we are. There's no way we can erase it and get completely disconnected from it. But like I said, it goes back to what I was talking about in the very beginning, that a lot of the foundation of it comes in being able to quiet the mind. It's like take all those thoughts and quiet them down so that your conscious mind is just a whisper. And then you can hear those quiet thoughts that are coming from those higher levels of consciousness that are deeper within the mind. And they don't come out as a yell, they come out as a tiny whisper. So that's why the conscious mind has to be so quiet, because you've got to listen carefully. It's almost like you're listening in between the thoughts, and those will guide you to the reality of who you are. And so that was probably the biggest lesson during the time period of Atlantis, because you know the, the reason why we probably were able to manipulate the DNA and do this energy work with the crystals and stuff was because we did still have more of a connection to being beings of creative energy and being able to create with our mind. And that's something that some people are aware of now, but I think that the number of people is a small percentage compared to the total population on the planet. So there's all this energy, we're living with all of this energy, and there's a collective consciousness of humanity. So everyone who is aware of their spiritual birthright, it's like we're kind of having to navigate within this stream of consciousness, which is predominantly heavy and very physical. And so when we're looking at that collective energy, it is creating a gravity, literally holding us down on this planet, because it's there's just so much physicality and so much disconnection from that spiritual energy. So as more and more people wake up and tune in and start to really be able to experience that and elevate their consciousness to those higher frequencies, it isn't completely accurate to say frequencies because they're non-physical. It's actually elevating our consciousness into the non-physical realms. But the nice thing is that our brain, our nervous system, is designed intentionally for all those non-physical energies to be able to interact with our mind and our body the same way that the physical ones do. And so, that's the only reason that we chose these bodies, and that's the only way that we can inhabit these bodies. And so, yeah, I mean the technology. I don't know if we should be necessarily envious of it. I think there's a lot of great things that we have. I mean, obviously, I couldn't live without, you know, toilet paper and having a nice bathroom. I can't imagine, you know, before we had all those things. There's a lot of comforts that we have. But when we look at how we use energy and things like that now, I have a background in physics and biology, and so looking at the environment, looking at how the things that we are doing affect the ecosystem and the planet as a whole, I have some definite concerns about our future if we don't start making some changes. So I believe we can make the changes. I believe that the technology either does exist or can be developed, but it is going to take a massive awareness on people's part to, start making some changes in their lifestyle.
I definitely love the progression of where the electric cars are going, and
Oh yeah.
it's, of course, I can't help it. Having been young and dumb, at one point, just knowing that the pure speed and power available at the paddle, when you hit that, there's no gears to have
Yeah.
to overcome. You don't have to mess around with, changing the gear ratio and all that stuff. Just
Hmm.
floor it and the power is right there. And so, of course, that's just in the infancy. And I'm so glad that it was developed in such ways to where it's almost like you would have thought, like with every car, where you start out slow and there's improvements slowly made, and it's not going to be quite there until maybe 10, 20 years down the road. It almost seemed like, bam, fully functional electric car, and it drives itself. Now, of course, we know there were a lot of bugs that were having to be fixed back, from how long has it been now? At least 10 years since the first
Mhm,
announcement. But anyway,
mhm.
it's just amazing. I personally love it, and I know there's always that debate between the muscle car guys and others that just want to move on to something new. But anyway, that's a different topic. I actually have two
Right.
questions. One is more of a
Sure.
clarification. So you wouldn't necessarily use Lemuria and Atlantis interchangeably. You would, as you mentioned earlier, so there are different progressions or different ages that one, I guess, existed, fell, and then another one rose. Is that would you say that?
So the time periods are always a little bit tricky because when we're doing the readings, time was measured and perceived and used differently during that time than how we use it now. We are very regimented in our perception of time. And, people often talk about time being an illusion, that it's just a perception of a progression of events. It's a framework that we created. And a lot of those things are true. The truth is, the earth is going to keep revolving around the sun. And the sun's going to keep moving through the galaxy, but how we perceive that progression of events has shifted. And so the like cycles, when we ask for how old somebody was, the readings can't come up with an age. It describes things in terms of cycles. And so when we're describing things in terms of cycles, it gets a little bit tricky because, like I said, one trip around the sun is a cycle, but also from birth to adolescence is one cycle, and then adolescence to adulthood is a cycle, adulthood to wisdom is a cycle. So cycles can be varying lengths of time. There's no real regimented structure to it. So keeping that in mind, what we keep getting consistently is that there were four cycles in the development of Atlantis. And so, as I mentioned, these were measured by a rise and then a fall in the civilization of Atlantis. Now, that does not necessarily mean that it was a complete and total extinction level event where all of humanity was wiped out and then we started from scratch. In fact, I don't think that would be very likely at all. But it would be maybe more accurate to say that it was like the rise of a civilization, a type of civilization, and there would be a specific type of learning that would go along with that. So there would be certain things that we're learning and doing, and maybe technology that we're developing, maybe developing things within ourselves, developing our interpersonal skills, all those kinds of things, and then that would be dropping off as those lessons sort of reached a peak. Then things would transition into something else. Now there could be in some cases a massive die off of some kind. It doesn't exclude a lot of people kind of checking out during the transition, but I don't think it would be like an extinction level event. So there's these rises and falls that would be the cycles of Atlantis. And then when we look at Lemuria and Mu, the research that I've seen seems to indicate that Lemuria and Mu could be two different names for the same time period. Now, these may not necessarily have been the same people, for example. So it could be two different groups, maybe who are coming into the world in maybe a couple of different places or even more. But the idea is that there was some overlap between Lemuria and Mu and Atlantis, and so the people who are coming in during Lemuria and Mu, I believe, they were having a little bit more difficulty coming into the physical experience. Some people were coming in, they could actually create bodies with energy and experience, but they would come in for a period of time, and then maybe their body would kind of fall apart. They'd lose their focus. They wouldn't be able to hold it together for the whole period of time. And so, that's where some of these images that we get in these mythologies and stuff like that of apparitions and things like that. I think that's where a lot of that may come from because again, you have to remember we're these beings of light and energy. And so the energy of the planet was different back then. And it's something that's difficult for us to imagine, but that would come out a lot in these readings during that time period. The best way to describe it was that the energy was less dense. And so it was easier for us as spiritual beings of energy to come in and to interact with the world. And so then at some point, people started interacting with the life forms that were on the planet, entering into animals, entering into plants, things like that, to just have different experiences and to learn from them. And then at some point, there was a desire to be able to manipulate those forms more so that they could be guided into specific experiences. So a lot of that led to some of the developments that paved the way for Atlantis. Some of that I kind of wonder if there might have been some karma created on our part, collectively, in terms of sort of overriding the free will of these creatures who kind of had their own life, their own existence, and then people were coming in and manipulating them for their own learning and experience. And so I think that, there may have been some lines crossed in places. But then I know that at some point, then we started creating vehicles that we could inhabit exclusively. We're at the point now where these physical forms that we're in would not exist without the soul. And so as soon as the soul leaves, the body is just, it's gone, it's inert. And so it's just like your car, as soon as you turn off the key and step out, the car's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't have free will of its own, so it can just go where it wants to. It is literally a vehicle for us. And when we're done, we just get out. And so that's kind of what these bodies are now. And so that time period of Lemuria or Mu, that was like an early stage development. The experiences that we had were very different than what we would think of today. And there was all kinds of different combinations of levels of experience. There were some people who probably could come in and create their own body of light that they could experience and interact. And then there are other people, maybe they couldn't hold their focus long enough. And so maybe they were the ones who came in and instead would try to bring their consciousness into animals, maybe, or something like that. Some people were just along for the ride. And that's where we get these ideas of like the nature spirits and things like that, where people, even when they're gardening, they talk about the nature spirits. Well, there are still entities who are invested in learning. And so people talk about talking to the nature spirits and kind of asking them to intercede in certain ways. And so there could be those entities, they're still learning at that level. And so they are focused on working with plants. And so they're non-physical. And if we interact with them and communicate with them, since they have a strong connection to a particular plant, then if you develop a rapport with that entity, then you could actually develop a cooperation, a partnership, as it would be. And so that's where I think a lot of these ideas, these mythological creatures like the fairies and the wood sprites and the spirits, things like that. I think that there's still a lot of that goes on, as well as like, for example, in our dream book, we talk about visitations. And so we could, in our dream state, see individuals maybe that we've known who have passed. They may come visit us, but we could also meet other people that we've never met physically in this life, who are just coming to help us out and give us some guidance. Now, we each have a guide who is really dedicated to helping us keep perspective. The guide's role is to kind of help give us a little nudge or a little insight or perspective when we need it most, and to kind of be somebody there that we can bounce ideas off of, because they are not in a physical form. So they always have that broader spiritual perspective kind of right out in front of them. And so we need that, because we can easily just get trapped in this physical experience and just go down deeper and deeper and deeper into this physical experience and totally forget who we are. And so the guide is intended to help give us a hand so we don't forget who we are, help remind us who we are. But we could have more than just that one guide too. Some people have more than one, and depending on what our interests are, you might have somebody who's an artist, might have somebody who's an engineer, or as I mentioned, like if you're a gardener. And so I think a lot of that, it's all it all comes full circle. We had those early experiences of observing the plant life, observing the animals, and hopefully without impinging our free will or our will on their life too much. And maybe there's some learning experience from that for people who did. But then moving into the Atlantean time period, which I think the beginning of what would be considered the Atlantean time period is pretty much where we were in these bodies. It may not have looked exactly like what we do now, but they were definitely being perfected during that time period, during those 4 cycles. And so I think we were more dedicated to having our own vehicle at that time where we could come in, we could move things around in the physical, we could, it's like having your own car. Like before, it's like you're going around, borrowing cars all the time, right? That's kind of a pain. So, it's like really nice to have your own car. It's like, well, it's like every morning I wake up, nobody else is in my body. I've got my body. I can just get up and go and have my life experience. And so it made it, I think, a lot more convenient, a lot cleaner experience. But of course, like I said, there were also drawbacks because we forgot who we were. There was something that we did, each one of us, and it's different for each of us. Obviously, there's a lot of people that may have similar experiences, but each of us did something. We had that original mistake that we made that got us trapped in this cycle. And so that's kind of where we are now is, learning to take those steps to unravel whatever that misunderstanding was that we created. And, once we free ourselves from that, we will be free to stay here if we want or to go elsewhere. And that's where I think we've developed these methodological ideas of enlightenment. Enlightenment isn't this um grand unreachable objective. It is kind of an objective. It is something where you can say, yes, I've reached this point. But if you're thinking about enlightenment, enlighten, I'm full of light. I am aware that I am a being of energy again, and I'm aware of my immortality again, and I have the ability to come and go from this physical experience whenever I want. And that's really the key. And it's not that we're trying to escape life. Whenever people tell me, "Oh my gosh, I hope this is my last life," I'm like, well, sorry to say this, but my experience has been if you're dying to get out of here, this probably is not going to be your last life. It's like my experience has been when people are getting close to that point where they can come and go as they please, they are so unattached to whichever way it's going to go. They're at peace with it no matter what happens. And so I find that most often is the kind of energy that it's like when we're at peace with it, no matter which way it goes, that's when we're ready to let go. And, so again, it's all getting back to our birthright. It's getting back to that original uh, purpose, I suppose you might say, of learning that this whole experience has just been a fun experience for us. That was the whole point. And it was so that we could learn how to be creators because we're creators. And so, what better place to learn about creation than the universe burst into existence out of seemingly nothing, right? And all these stars began forming, right? And these huge burning balls of gas. That was probably pretty exciting in the very beginning. And then these planets started to form, and they were just sitting around and probably, moderately interesting, but a little bit boring at the same time until all of a sudden all these things started wiggling around all over these planets, So imagine our delight when all of a sudden all this stuff's going on. These plants are growing up and these animals are jumping around. So it's probably, you know, if you think about us like spiritual kids, it was like we couldn't keep ourselves away. It's like we had to come see what was going on. So the whole process of how we got into this situation that we're in now makes perfect sense. And so, during those early times, like I said, we were just doing all kinds of different things. But then as we kind of got more structured with it, then that's really the beginning of Atlantis. But then what I would describe the end of the Atlantean time period, the end of that 4th cycle, which could be anywhere from like 100,000 to 10,000 BC or something like that. The last period of Atlantis is really where the last physical spiritual connection existed And so humanity made a very pronounced shift toward a very physical way of thinking and doing things. And so if you look at our history since about 10,000 BC up to the present, you will see that pattern that we took a very physical approach to things. And so I think probably what happened at the end of that last period of Atlantis is the beings who did not want to be part of that just left. And then if you think about it, like almost like buoyancy, all those beings of energy and light who were still completely plugged in to their true nature and interacting with us. And that's something else too. I don't think I explicitly said that right now, but that was another thing that was very unique about the time period of Atlantis is there were a lot of people that were very physical because they had already forgotten who they are, but they'd be walking down the street with these people who are full of light, who are completely, full of light and completely aware of who they are and their spiritual connection. So, it was this really diverse group of spiritual and physical people all living and working together. And so that I think is another key difference between the Atlantean time period and the current time period. I think the fully enlightened individuals on this planet right now are few and far between. In fact, I've heard a lot of reports from different sources that seem to indicate that out of the entire population of the planet, only about 2% of the population is significantly invested in the process of enlightenment and intentional evolution. And so, if you think about it, that's a very small percentage. And so, when those beings left at the end of the Atlantean time period, it's almost like all those heavy kind of physical energies sort of came crashing down on everyone who decided to stay or everyone who just couldn't leave. So in a way that it kind of makes it harder for us to get up off this planet because you wake up, I'm sure you probably feel it. You wake up, you're in a fairly good mood, but then, something happens. Somebody's energy is like bringing you down, or something happens in the world that brings you down. You can feel these rises and falls in your energy. And that's kind of what we deal with every day. And, it doesn't make it insurmountable. It's where we are in our learning. And the good news is we're eternal beings. So we've got time, right?
Mhm.
Just, hopefully we don't mess up our planet because, it's a pretty cool place to learn. So I wouldn't want to have to go somewhere else if we didn't have to. So I'm hoping that we can get that part worked out.
Right. Well, I know what you mean, and this might be very cocky to say, but when I was younger, I had that before because I was always so wanting to be agreeable with people. But after a
Uh-huh.
while, and then with my experiences that everybody I think knows about, I just kind of stopped giving a something. I don't want to cuss right now, but anyway,
Oh, right. Yeah.
because it's one of these things. It's like I'm happy. It's like I'm always happy. I wake up in the morning and my wife just looks at me like, "Oh goodness, what?" And well, she's happy too, but I'm just talking about recently. It's just she can't sleep very well and baby's kicking her all night and all kinds
Oh,
of stuff,
right.
and I'm
Yeah.
just like, hey, let's go start the day. And
Yeah.
but anyway, the second question I had, and thank you also very much for going into on that great detail when I've asked the first one about the Atlantis and Lemuria. But what I wanted to ask was, this is something I heard. I don't know if you can speak on this, and if not, I understand. This was a while back, and this was so intriguing to me because this was the first time that kind of bursted my bubble on time and age, which was the
Hmm.
claim that there are still Atlanteans walking among us. And I was like, whoa, so do you know anything regarding, did they have similar lifespans as we did? Or is this just another, rumor or whatever? I mean, like I said, I just kept it in the back of my head as a story. I have not, heard or seen anything since that either proves or disproves it, but I figured I'll bring it up to you if you might have any information on that there's still, because the whole concept of that idea was that they did have a longer lives than we do, and that whatever catastrophic event happened during that time, some managed to survive and are still kind of living our lives because they supposedly looked very similar to us. So anyway, that's. I hope I've given you enough background information. If you can speak on that, great. If not, I perfectly understand.
Oh no, I would be happy to, because actually I can speak to that, and from my experience and research, that Atlanteans are very much alive and walking among us. In fact, I'm an Atlantean technically. I mean, I think a lot of us are, but I think from the way the question is phrased, that some of the people who may be describing that Atlanteans are still walking among us, it seemed like there might be a very physical way of looking at it, because I don't know for sure if there are Atlanteans among us who are still in their same physical form that they were in back during that time
Right,
period.
right,
Because I mean, that would be a very long time to maintain a physical form, a physical vehicle. And I don't think that there are very many, probably, if any, that are. I mean, even some of the most prominent immortals that I know of, I don't know of any that are 10,000 years old. I mean, they'd have to be, well, it would be 10,000 BC, so that'll be 12,000 years old, and I'm
right.
not sure what the purpose would be for maintaining a physical form that long. Even Babaji, who I believe is thousands of years old, I don't believe stays in the physical form all the time. I think he may transition into an energy form and then back into a physical form. And so I'm not, and that was common actually during the time period of Atlantis. That's what I was talking about before, where there were people who were very kind of entrenched in the physical form, where they couldn't come and go as they pleased, walking down the street with people who could come and go whenever they wanted. They could dematerialize their body and rematerialize it and things like that. They were very proficient. And so there was this difference in energetic spirituality and ability during that time. And there are still some entities I know on this planet who are capable of maintaining their physical form for very long periods of time, much longer than what we would be normally accustomed to, hundreds of years. And so I actually believe, some of those characters in the Bible may have actually been, it was figurative but also literal at the same time, where, the Bible does that a lot of times. It operates on more than one level. People who are lived 450 years or 900 years, earlier in my life, I thought, oh, well, that's just like, a figurative representation. But, learning about metaphysics more in depth, I think it's even possible that somebody could get to that level. But like I mentioned, I have had an Atlantean past lifetime, and so I am an Atlantean. I'm walking among you. You've even sat with me before, so technically I am an Atlantean, but I also know I've had multiple lifetimes between that time period and now, because I've had those past life readings done. And I've been in Spain, I've been in England, I've been in Russia, I've been all these different places. And so if you think about it, that we're curious creatures, we're curious beings, so if you're curious and you're an explorer and you want to create an experience and experiment, you don't want to just stay in one place all the time. And so I grew up in the United States this lifetime. Well, I may want to go somewhere else. I may want to go to Africa next lifetime, or Australia, or back to Europe. Who knows where I'll go, but I'll probably look at the planet, look at what's going on in different places, think about what I want to do with my life, and then choose where I want to go based on that. So the thing is that the population of the planet is so large now. I mean, um, with almost 7 billion people, it's like, um, there probably are a lot of people alive now who were not with us during the time period of Atlantis. But I would say anybody who is really interested in spirituality, who is focused on metaphysical development and aware of being a spiritual being, things like that, those are probably people who were around during the time period of Atlantis, because that was, as I mentioned, that was a time when that kind of dichotomy of experience was very prevalent. So at the same time, I'm not discounting what you're asking, or what, wherever the information is, where the idea came from. because like I said, there could be some individual. I don't think there's a lot of them, especially someone who would maintain that body for that long. I would think there would just be maybe a handful. But I think there's a far, far greater number of people who were with us at that time of Atlantis and who have gone through multiple lifetimes since then. If you think of a lifespan being maybe 50 or 60 years and sometimes shorter. So, you might have a really short lifetime for some reason, or you might have a really long lifetime. But, you figure maybe about every 100 years going through a cycle, then, just since the time of Jesus, you could have 20 lifetimes or something like that over the last 2,000 years. So, we could have all these different experiences. And, there could be long periods of time that we don't come into a physical life too. Like if there was some kind of cataclysmic event and there's not a lot of people to come into to give birth, there might be a lot of, you know, entities just kind of hanging out waiting for a vehicle. And that may account for part of our population boom now. There's probably a lot of entities kind of hanging out waiting for a way to come in. And we're just at a point where there's more people in at one time than what we've had before. But we also know from different accounts, the population of the planet has reached into the millions different times. This is possibly the highest human population ever. I don't think Atlantis got anywhere close to this. I think it was just in the millions, but I think this could be the first time in our history, we reached into the billions. So it'd be kind of interesting to see where that goes. But again, it's another new adventure, right? But
Right.
it's I mean, again, it might kind of echo back to this idea that we are in this long sort of um, contemplation of physical experience. That people are so attracted to and focused on that we are having a physical experience. But the key, I believe, our future lies in realizing that we are spiritual beings and that we are a spiritual being having a physical experience. So it doesn't change the fact that we're having a physical experience, but we're adding onto it, we're reaching beyond it. And I think that the discoveries, the awarenesses, the realizations that we're having in quantum physics and the areas of um, both astrophysics and quantum physics, I think it's very exciting in that I believe a lot of those things are becoming possible because our consciousness as a whole is shifting back toward the realization of who we are. And as we realize that we're a spiritual being, we become aware of these deeper energies. I mean, if you think about it, the idea for atoms was around for 2,000 years, but it was only the last 100 years that we were able to really prove that there are atoms, and then look at the subatomic particles and the quantum particles and understand quantum physics and relativity, all these things that we are understanding. And yet, even though quantum mechanics was developed 100 years ago, we weren't really able to do a lot with that. We just had an awareness of like, okay, yeah, it gets really weird down there. Well, now we're starting to develop applications. And so we're kind of getting to the point where I think we're almost ready for a new leap. And I think part of that too is understanding that spiritual connection, that our consciousness is literally affecting the probabilities at the quantum level. That's where our mind actually begins to interact with matter. That's why things get so weird there, because particles are blipping in and out of existence. And, when they disappear, the information is still there. So the information is going somewhere. It's not just disappearing completely. Otherwise, the particle would have no form to come back to. So the fact that these virtual particles are blipping in and out of existence, and we have quantum entanglement where particles, once they've interacted with each other, they stay connected to each other even at vast distances. All these things speak to paranormal experiences, metaphysical experiences that we've talked about, where we talk about how somebody walks into a room and maybe they have a lot of emotional energy about something, and then they can leave the room. Well, somebody else can actually walk into that room again, having no conscious knowledge that that person has been there, and they can pick up on that residual energy that the person left behind. Because when that person is in the room, they're broadcasting all this energy. That energy is interacting with and affecting the walls, the furniture, everything in that room is changed because that person was in there. That's true for all of us. No matter where we go, we're always changing things, no matter where we are. But it just depends on the extent to which we do it. If what I was describing is somebody having a peak emotional experience, maybe they were really upset because they were angry or sad or in grief because maybe they lost someone or something like that. They had a high level of energy, a high level of emotional energy. And so they had a big impact on that room. That makes it easier for somebody to come in and pick that up. But even when you're coming in and you're just having, kind of a normal day, I mean, you're affecting everything in your wake. No matter where you go, what you do, there is no escaping it. We're always affecting things. Every thought that you have is affecting the world in some way. So that's why it's so important for us to be disciplined. When we are undisciplined with our thinking and we allow ourselves to go into those fear thoughts and revenge thoughts and all those things, those are unproductive pathways and they are affecting the world. And so that's where, and there could be truth to this, and I can't really speak to whether this is absolutely true, but it could be a component of it. But I've heard people who are intuitives who are suggesting that what we're experiencing with planetary warming and the global climate change is at least partly due to the psychic energy of humanity as a whole. And there could be some truth to that, because if you look at just our country, especially over the last 10 years, I would say over the last 10 years, our country has just become so polarized, and people more and more, it seems like they're not willing to talk to each other and learn from each other and exist as one group. And so, I always say it's the human race. There's one human family. We are one species. So we've got to get back to that realization that we are one species and that we have far more in common with each other than we have these differences. But right now, there's so much attention focused on all the differences and the discord and things like that, that it just seems to be amplifying, and the more you stay focused on the discord, the more discord happens. And so that discord reinforces more discord, so it's like this negative feedback loop that starts forming. And so it could be that, what's happening here is sort of a microcosm of the planet as a whole. And all of that is stirring up the energy of the planet, which is causing warming and unstable weather patterns and things. Because like I said, it's all affecting things at the quantum level, which the quantum level, there's no demarcation point between the quantum level and the atomic level, and the atomic level to the molecular level. So it's like it's all one continuum. It's one smooth continuum. So if you start mixing things up at that quantum level, it's going to have this subtle effect on the atomic level, but it will have an effect. And then that will carry out into the molecular level. And then by the time you get to the molecular level, well, you're talking about the cellular level to our body, so you're affecting the health of the cells. And then, of course, the cells collectively affect our health overall. So that's really the basis of where we say, yes, you can affect your health with your mind. You can affect the health of another person with your mind, and they can be receptive to you helping them. They can affect their own health. They can help you affect your health. So that goes both ways, though, because you can help your body become healthier, or you can, harm your body. Like I talked about some of the attitudes earlier that can actually create disease. It's like if we're holding on to anger, that could do a real number on the body. It's shutting things down. It's creating all this toxic energy. Your liver and your kidneys are having to try to process through all that toxic stuff that you're creating with your hormones and chemicals that you're releasing, holding on to all those negative emotions. So that's where our thoughts become physical. Is as soon as you have a thought and it creates an emotion, your hypothalamus is just releasing all these chemicals and stuff into your bloodstream, and that's having an effect. That's what creates the physical effects that we experience from our emotions. And so when we're holding on to things like anger that's toxic, I mean, we use the words, we were like, that person has a really toxic attitude, so it's just like we recognize that it's creating toxins, and your body has to process those out. And if you're doing that all the time, your liver and your kidneys, they get fatigued. They can't process as much. They kind of get damaged, and then the toxins begin building up in the body. So all those things, that's recognizing the power of our mind. And that all goes back to the fact that we are these beings of energy and light, that we exist beyond the physical realm, that there are these higher energetic dimensions that are non-physical. That's why Einstein recognized that the speed limit of the universe is the speed of light. But that's because I believe what's going to be discovered is that the speed of light is sort of like the barrier of the physical world. And as we move past that point, then we start to move into those super physical realms. And so people have different ways of describing it, but it's extra dimensions. It's non-physical though. But we are existing and interacting with all those dimensions. And so we are multidimensional. And so part of that is learning how to align our consciousness so that we can tune into that. And that's where like the ability of astral projection comes in. Like you can do that while you're sleeping or even just consciously. And when I started first had my first experience with astral projection, that was one of the first experiences that I had that proved to me that I was a being of energy, that I could separate my consciousness from my body and still be alive. And so that was exciting for me in some ways. But I didn't want to go out and do all these adventures and stuff with astral travel. But to me, the whole value, the point of the experience was to have an experience where I knew that I was a being of energy instead of just believing that I was a being of energy. But once I could experience that separation of my consciousness from my body, I knew. It's like, yeah, I believed it. And part of me inside, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me. Something really rings true. But I couldn't really say, well, I've had an experience where I've separated my consciousness from my body. But now I have, so it took me a lot of time. I didn't really come into this life with all my whistles and bells turned on, so to speak. I'm sort of like a practical, down to earth intuitive, where a lot of my intuitive experiences I had to earn. I had to work hard and earn them. I think that's true for most people, where um, we have to put the work in. And like I said, it all goes back to those basics of the hardest part, I think, is learning how to get control of the conscious mind. So you can take all those thoughts that are just buzzing around like a bunch of angry bees all the time, distracting us. It's like getting all that to just become very, very quiet and finally get a chance to sort of listen in between those spaces, in between the thoughts. And then that's where you can start seeing some of these things. You can get to the kasha like we were talking about. And by the way, the kasha is where we have those astral experiences. And it's really just a matter of projecting our consciousness into that realm, into that dimension. And so the akasha is the energy of that level. And we can form a body out of that substance, kind of like we form a body out of this substance. And then we can interact in that level and experience things, talk to people, all those kinds of things like we would have here. But since it's a different dimension, a different realm, our experience is obviously very different. But we can still have those experiences. And so again, it gets back to that idea that where we are going is being able to go back and forth, travel back and forth. It's not necessarily forsaking the world and, oh man, I'd be glad when I never have to come back here. You may develop that ability to go back and forth, and you may want to keep coming back. That's what a lot of these great teachers have done. And I mentioned like Babaji and these people, Jesus and people like that, the Buddha, who came in and they probably had a mission to kind of help people get oriented to the world, to this experience, so they could have a spiritual knowledge and a spiritual recognition in this physical experience, because we are living in a dichotomy. There's no two ways about that. There's no way we can get away from that. We are physical beings. We've got a physical body that is related to the animals that evolved on this planet. So we've got these animal urges going on that we've got to be aware of, that we need to have self-control over.
Right.
We have animal urges, and we have animal needs. We've got to eat regularly, we've got to drink, and we've got to defecate. We do all the animal things, right? So physically speaking, you can say, well, yeah, this is a mammal body. It fits the mammal definition. It's related to the primates. We've got, like 98% or more of our DNA is related to the primates. And we share like 99.8% of our DNA with other humans. There's only like a 0.2% difference between you and anyone else on the planet. The differences between us are so minute. It's mind-boggling. And plus the fact that we are all spiritual beings. We're sharing this experience together. So those are some of the realizations that I think are going to really get us a long way. But the recognition that we can shift the probabilities of the world with our mind is just astounding. I remember just being amazed by that when I first started studying metaphysics. And so I do little experiments and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is too weird. Fact is weirder than like the strangest fiction I could come up with,
Right.
that I could actually do this.
Right.
And now it's like, as I'm studying quantum physics and getting into that, that's like my next step. That I'm working on the math, because the math is pretty advanced, but I'm working on learning about the math so I get deeper into the quantum mechanics and the probabilities. But I'm seeing how that's how we do it, is that our mind is an energy, and at quantum mechanics, everything is just a subtle energy at that level. So our mind is really just giving it a blueprint. It's giving it direction. And then as we give the matter direction, the energy direction, it tends to coalesce around that. And it becomes more and more likely to coalesce around what we're projecting than something random. And so the more we visualize and the stronger our mind is, and the more focused we can be without becoming distracted, the more energy gathers around it, and the faster our images will manifest. Obviously, like I said, we want to be responsible with our thinking, because if we're prone to fear thoughts and anger thoughts, things like that, we're going to create some ugly situations. But if we can be focused with our thinking, where we're creating positive, productive things, we can have more of that in the world. And that's really where we are intending to go. I think all of us inside, that's where we want to go, but we get sidetracked. That's the thing right now. But yeah, I mean, that, and like I said, manifesting health in the body is just another visualization. It's another manifestation, just like manifesting a new job. One is not more difficult than the other. It's all just giving your mind a direction. And you'll find, if you do that, if you apply it to your body, you'll find your cells are thrilled to have direction. They welcome it. And so if you think about your body, you have trillions of cells, each one of them alive, each one of them an individual living organism. And so this body is more like a community. There's trillions of bacteria, there's trillions of cells. They're all working together in harmony for the same goal of creating a healthy, fully thriving organism. And the last thing that any of them want is death, right? They all want to be alive. They all want to be happy. And so you are the directing intelligence. You're like, the leader of this community. And so if you start giving your cells and all the bacteria, even everything, direction, they will all fall in line. And so everybody wants the same thing. So those are just things to be aware of. It's really quite exciting when you think about it, and when you start experimenting with it, the things that we can do. And it is, like I said, I can't say it enough. That's why this has been my study for my whole life, because just the reality of our existence is so amazing and strange and thrilling and complicated and difficult. Sometimes it's all these different things. You can experience all those things at once, but the curiosity of me of how all this works, I never get tired of it. It's just amazing.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Patrick. Well, I wanted to ask you, do you want to go a little bit into Naked in Public, Dream Symbols Revealed, and then
Oh,
maybe
sure.
after that we can take some questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And for those,
So,
I'm
Nicholas,
sorry, just real quick, I
no,
just
go
want to
ahead.
address everyone else watching. For those of you watching, please get your questions ready. As always, we're going to do some Q&A as well. Patrick is going to, you might have some questions from what he previously covered about Atlantis and the previous book. And now we're going to go into the second one, which I always found interesting, especially when it comes to dreams. And I'm kind of looking forward to what you have to say about that, Patrick. Please go ahead.
Sure. So, the main thing when we look at dreams is it goes back to that same fundamental principle that we are these non-physical beings that are having a physical experience. And so when we go to sleep at night, at at one point in my life I thought that sleep was a waste of time. And I thought, wow, if I could recapture that 8 hours a day, I would be so productive because if you think about it, we sleep a third of our lives. So 8 hours out of 24, that's a full third of our lives. By the time you're 60 years old, you will have slept for 20 years. So I thought, man, I'm just going to make use of that time. And I thought either it's a real waste of time or there must be something going on. It turned out it was the latter, that there was actually something going on that we really needed. As I started studying dreams more in depth, I discovered that we go through these different dream cycles. And so there's four in particular that we need to hit, and each one of them are approximately 90 minutes. And so that would be approximately a 6 hour sleep. But then, considering most people take about 2 hours to go into that first deep sleep state, that's where the 8 hours of sleep comes in per person. And so each one of those levels actually, I discovered, correspond very nicely to different levels of consciousness within the subconscious mind or the soul that I had learned about. And so I believe that what's happening is that at night we are compelled to reconnect with that spiritual part of ourselves. And since we don't have the conscious skills and the conscious ability to intentionally connect, that we were designed or evolved with this period of time where we're compelled to connect. And so that's why we have to sleep every night. And in fact, when they've denied people the ability to dream during the night, people develop these psychotic tendencies because your mind gets very unbalanced. You have to dream. And so when they would deny people the ability to dream, like they'd go into that dream state sooner and sooner and sooner, and even start to have those dreams imposed upon them while they're awake, like waking dreams. So the mind, it's very apparent that this connection to the dream time is essential to our mental stability and our balance. And there's so many things that are happening while we're sleeping. In fact, that's where our short-term memory is transferred into long-term memory. So short-term memory might be something that will stay with you for the day, but then you need to transfer that to long-term memory while you're sleeping. And so that's where you're actually creating those neural pathways where you can take that image and you can hold on to that for a very long period of time. There's so many things that are happening in our subconscious mind. Like we talked about visualization earlier. So you may not know how everything is supposed to be happening. Your subconscious mind will work on all those unknown details and start bringing everything together for your creation. So, all of that is happening in the subconscious mind, and the dream state is our connection, our gateway into all those subconscious experiences. And so when we start to look at our dreams and understand what we're actually getting in the dream, we have to always look at it from that perspective. It's important to look at it from the perspective of a eternal energetic being rather than a physical being, because it's easy to look at maybe you're having an affair with your next door neighbor and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to cheat on my wife. What am I doing here? And that's a very literal physical interpretation of it. But when you look at it from the standpoint of an energetic being, then I would say, okay, so what is it that my subconscious mind is communicating to me? Because the subconscious mind, again, like we said, the experience there is very different. I talked about astral projecting. You go into the akasha, it's a very different experience. You can't just walk around like you're in the physical world. And that's one of the experiences almost a mistake. It could be a mistake. You could consider a learning experience or something like that when you start lucid dreaming. So lucid dreaming is very closely related to astral projection, because lucid dreaming is actually in the dream state, and you wake up so that you are consciously aware that you are no longer in the physical world, that you're in a non-physical realm, that you are in a dream, and you can start taking control of that dream. And so it is very closely related to the experience of astral projection. So in fact, you can go from there into an astral projection at that time. And so when I worked with lucid dreaming at one point, one of the first experiences that I had as I woke up in my dream is that I would want to just start walking around like I'm in the physical world and I have gravity and stuff. And I discovered that my body was not a physical body. It was an energetic body. And so when I tried to move, I would just sort of slip around like I was on ice or something. So I had to move that body very differently. I had to be more, how would I describe it? Intentional about the body moving in a certain direction. And I discovered I could float. I could just sort of glide or, eventually fly. And flying dreams, a lot of people have had flying dreams they're very thrilling and satisfying. And so the mental attitude when you have a flying dream usually represents that you're experiencing a lot of mental freedom, that you can do whatever you want and you're capable of anything. And so then that expresses, because as we reaffirm who we are and that we are capable, we can do whatever we want, that you experience that freedom of creativity. And so then that often translates into having a flying dream. And a lot of times lucid dreams and flying dreams go hand in hand too. So I remember some of my early flying dreams too, where I had this kind of growth curve where I was, trying to get up and still kind of felt like I was bound by gravity, and then realized, oh, wait a minute, I can fly. Or maybe I would be flying and way up high and just flying around the trees and all kinds of great stuff. And then as I became more and more aware that I was awake in the experience, my conscious physical limitations started creeping back in with my conscious awareness. And then I would sort of lose control, or maybe like come sinking back down to the ground or something like that. So
Right. Patrick, I
our
just want to ask
conscious
you, I'm sorry to
oh, sure,
interrupt,
sure.
just want to ask you something real quick. So, but in that case, that's a literal translation of what you were kind of experiencing. Are there some symbols? Well, actually, we all know that a lot of times we would have symbols in dreams that say something or mean something to us, but are not clear to our conscious mind once we wake up. Like kind of like
Mhm.
I often use the example, like I was walking, down this path and it was in the city, and then this pink elephant just walked out in front of me and all this other stuff, and you wake up and it's like, that's strange. And it kind of almost just deters you from thinking about what that was about, because it was so random, so weird. You just kind of, oh, strange dream, and you move on. Is there something within a dream that we can look forward to, or that can kind of help decipher it each time, that once we're done with a certain process of something, to kind of be able to analyze it and get more from it instead of just ignoring it because it's too confusing?
Sure, sure. Let's cover a couple of the rules that we usually give people for guidance in terms of kind of establishing the perspective of the dream and where it's coming from. So the first thing is that every dream is about you, the dreamer, and so it's coming from your mind, and so it's all about what's going on in your consciousness. And as I mentioned, it's from a non-physical perspective. So, like for example, when death shows up in a dream, it usually just represents that there's some kind of change occurring in your consciousness, because your subconscious mind is not attached to mortality like the physical body. So death is not a bad thing in a dream. It's just a transition. So when you look at the symbols and the things that show up, it's important to remember that this is a non-physical experience that you're having, and your brain is downloading that experience into your physical brain that is used to physical experiences. And so it has to try to make sense of it. So your brain is literally saying, okay, this is the energy that I'm getting of this experience, and I need to find something that is like that. So dreams are like a story of analogies. And so your brain is literally reaching in for different things. It uses your imagination or memory to draw on different experiences. And so, like you said, the pink elephant, it would be an image that would represent something that is going on in your life. So here are some examples of some common symbols. So for example, when you're dreaming about your physical body, it usually will show up as a car. It could show up as your body, but a lot of times it shows up as a car because a car is a vehicle. And so your subconscious mind recognizes your physical body is just a vehicle that helps get you from point A to point B. It helps you interact with things in the physical world. It's not all wrapped up in, oh, this is who you are. This is all you are. It's a vehicle. So a car is a suitable substitute for that. So a lot of times the car will show up, and maybe how the car is running, what might indicate the health of your body, or if people crash or something like that, might indicate that you feel like you're out of control in your life or something like that. Something else that shows up a lot is animals. You talked about the elephant. So animals don't have imagination like we do. So they have memory and they have attention. And so they can respond to things that are happening right in front of them. They can remember things that have happened to them before. So they know where to go to get their food. They know past experiences, but they don't imagine like, oh, well, what am I going to do at 3 o'clock? They don't have a perception of future time. That's what imagination enables us to do, is to imagine the future and to shape things before they actually happen. And so animals don't do that. So whenever we're living like that through habit, based just on our past experiences and what's right in front of us, then we're living the life of an animal. And we're being very habitual. So the lesson there usually is, whenever you're operating from the point of perspective of a habit, that we need to use our imagination to imagine, okay, so what do you want your life to be like? Don't just be reactive to all the things that are coming up in your life. Sit down for a moment. Imagine, what do you want your life to be? How do you want this thing to go? If you're not feeling well, or you have some kind of a health issue, imagine your body being healed. Imagine that part of yourself being better. If there's a life situation with a relationship or something, imagine that being better. Now, with that, speaking of relationships, as I mentioned earlier, when we have people show up in our dream, they don't literally represent that person in our life. So that's why I was saying, like, if I had a dream about having an affair with my next door neighbor, it doesn't mean that I want to have an affair with my next door neighbor and cheat on my wife. It means there is something that that person represents, which is in me. I'm recognizing that coming out. And so we usually recommend that you describe that person in your life with one or two words. What are one or two words, first two words that come to your mind that would describe that person? So caring, angry, generous, whatever it is, however you would describe them, you get two words. And it's not that you can't do more, but we just try to simplify it so you can get right to the essence. Two words is usually enough to get the gist of the part of yourself that person is representing. So again, your subconscious mind and your brain is your subconscious mind is reaching into your brain to pull out an image to say, what's going on with you right now? You are expressing just like this person expresses, and the person, and there's a certain way that you would relate to them and associate with them and recognize them. So it will be similar. You just need to identify those one or two words, and then you can see the aspect in yourself. I mentioned death. The house is usually where, the house is where we live, and so that will often represent our mind. And food represents knowledge, because we have to keep taking in food to nourish the body. So again, our subconscious mind does not have a body, because that's the energetic part of ourselves, right? It doesn't need physical food, but the mind needs knowledge and information. We need to keep taking in experiences to nourish the mind. So food is going to represent some kind of knowledge or information that we're taking in, so that we can learn and grow. And so I'll maybe leave you, if you have some other symbols that you want to know about. Those are some of the basics that show light. Does that kind of give you an idea,
Yeah,
kind of
no,
how we can start looking at these
it
things?
does. Can I maybe ask you about specifics about the house as well? So
Sure.
what would
Yeah.
Differences of floors, for example, from your understanding, what would that represent? Whether, let's say, you're in your house, but you have a, let's say, concrete floor or a wooden floor or something, does that have a meaning specifically?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can get into some of the finer details, and I usually recommend for people, especially in the beginning, try not to get too deep into the details because, you could start worrying about, well, why was, this person wearing a red dress versus a blue dress? Or, why, did this person have a yellow bow? You know, uh, I'm not sure. I mean, there could be specific meaning to all those little details, but in general, I think dreams are usually long enough and have so much information that we could really get lost in the weeds. So I usually try to stick to the broad strokes. But if you're going to look at some specifics, like if there's something significant about the floor, for some reason your attention goes to the floor because let's say you go in and it's a wood floor, but it's all broken up and you can even like see down into the basement. So that would be significant. That's not a normal experience. That's something is really bringing your attention to that. So I would say like your house is the mind, right? But the floor would be a foundation because that's where you stand. So that's like your foundation. So that would be representing like your foundational beliefs and things that are kind of like a lot of your security rests. But those are kind of all broken up. So there might be something in your life that is kind of shaking your beliefs to the core. And so since it's broken up, you can see down into the basement. So the basement is kind of dark and dank, and that's where we store stuff that we don't really want to have to deal with, right? All your stuff
Right.
goes down in the basement that you don't want to have to deal with. So that's what the basement would represent to us because that's what we do in our physical life. So in your mind, that's kind of where we store all the baggage that we're carrying around that we don't want to let go of yet. So we're carrying it around with us everywhere we go. We don't want to let go of it, but at the same time, we don't want to have to deal with it either. So we just stick it down there,
Right.
right? So if you can see down into the basement from your upper floor, it means that maybe there's some kind of process you're going through where things are shaking you up, and you're like looking down and you're kind of being able to see like some of this stuff, this baggage and stuff that you're carrying around with you, maybe that you haven't really dealt with in a while, sort of bringing it up to the
Right.
surface.
Well, Patrick, I don't want to throw you a curveball, but what about dreams where you are talking to yourself and you have an actual physical reflection of yourself and you're having an interaction?
Oh, that would be a very interesting dream. So you're talking about something where maybe you're in front of a mirror and talking to your reflection,
Or
or looking at your reflection
I'm
in a
talking about like
pool,
an actual another version, like a twin you, and you're talking.
like a twin.
Right.
Okay. So what I would say is that would probably represent a level of self-awareness in your consciousness that everything is really you anyway, because
Right.
like I said, all the people who show up in the dream are you. And so, there's like this level of self-awareness that it is you. And so you are like recognizing that you are talking to yourself. And so I would say the reflection or the image of yourself that shows up to you would represent your consciousness in your conscious life, but with that added layer, like I described, that it would also indicate that you have a high level of self-awareness that all of these aspects are really you. So you just sort of cut to the chase. You're like, okay, let's get rid of all the theatrics. I'm just going to have a little conversation with myself here,
Right. Right.
and it's a healthy conversation though, because it isn't like someone who you get worried about because they're like talking to themselves and then answering themselves, and you're like, okay, how many people are in there? you know it's um it's you consciously talking to your subconscious mind, and so that level of communication between the conscious and subconscious mind is very healthy.
Okay. Um, Patrick, what do you think? I have one more question, and then do you want to go into some Q&A?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so everyone watching, please make sure you add 3 little stars before you ask the question, so that way I know the question is directly towards the guest, and so I'll give you a chance to get that prepped, and I'll get going and reading them off in the chat here pretty soon. But first, a question for Patrick regarding dreams. Do what about those people that sometimes they say, "I never dream," and it's so strange. For I hear that all the time, from people that say that, and it's almost difficult for me to imagine, because there's always something that I remember, even if I can't remember the dream specifically. I still remember I dreamt something. There was this and that in it. Can't remember the details, but I know I dreamt. But they just
Mhm.
claim that they just close their eyes, they open their eyes back up, and they're back in this world. What do you have any info on that?
So I've looked into the scientific aspects of dreaming along with the metaphysical aspects of dreaming, and there's a lot of scientific evidence that supports the idea that we are dreaming every single night. Whether you are aware of it or not, that process is happening and actually happens for around 10 minutes at the end of a 90-minute sleep cycle. And so again, those numbers in terms of the lengths of the cycles can shift around a bit, but in general, you could say on average it's like about a 90-minute cycle, and out of that, toward the end of that 90-minute cycle, we dream in the REM state for about 10 minutes or so. And as I mentioned, this is an essential process of our mind. You would be going psychotic if you were denied the ability to dream. So if you are, maintaining a stable, healthy mental state, then I can guarantee you that you are dreaming on a regular basis. Now, the key is, like you said, it's whether or not you can remember the dream. And most people were not really taught that there was any kind of value in remembering the dreams. There's really nothing for us there. And so a lot of times we would remember dreams that were particularly graphic. People remember nightmares, for example, because they're scary. So it really gets the adrenaline going. And so they remember that. They wake up from it. But also it could be dreams that were maybe interesting, or something that had a lot of energy to it, or things like that. So most people would remember dreams periodically. And so there might be something going on that would stimulate them to remember that dream, or maybe they were woken up in the middle of that REM state. And so 9 out of 10 times when people were woken up out of the REM state, they could recall a dream. And only about 1 out of 9 times, if they were outside of the REM state, in that deep sleep state, could they remember the dream. And so again, that dream is that information of that experience being downloaded into the brain, and then being sorted through and interpreted, and then being sort of explained to us in that picture allegorical form. And so I think Jung had a lot of insight when he was talking about these archetypes, because we have found also there are these symbols that we share in common, even though we might have a personal spin to it. There's also, because again, we all share this human experience, and we're more similar with each other than we are different. And so there are a lot of symbols that we could consider almost like universal between people, but then we might have our own personal uh, view on it. So the main thing, like when we start working with students, when I have a student who says, "Oh yeah, I've never remembered a dream in my life," or "I almost never dream," just because they don't remember the dream, they're assuming that they are not dreaming. And so usually we'll send them home with some techniques that they can use. Like, for example, having a notebook by their bed with a pencil, so that as soon as they wake up, they can start recording their dreams. So they have this intention in their mind that they want to write down their dream. Or another thing they can do, like an affirmation, a simple affirmation that you use, is just reminding yourself as you go to sleep, "I will remember my dream in the morning." And so that starts to set this intention that you want to remember your dreams. And so as soon as you set that intention, you start remembering your dreams more often. And so somebody goes from not remembering any dreams to remembering like one or two a week. And that's a pretty big shift if you think about it, from no dreams to one or two a week, and maybe sometimes even more. And as you keep practicing, you can actually develop it where maybe you remember a dream almost every single night. And so, since that process is ongoing, it's really just training our mind to recall the dream. And then, usually, if you're going to get into this at all, I recommend writing the dream down so that you have a record, because a dream is like an echo. And so, if you wake up and get up and go to the bathroom, start getting dressed, the echo is going to fade. And by the time you sit down to write it down, the whole thing will be gone. You won't be able to remember anything. And you'll be like, "I know that I had a dream when I woke up this morning, but I can't even remember what it was about now." So we recommend writing it down first thing while it's fresh. And then you can get up and start your day. And so you may need to develop kind of a shorthand, because I know that some dreams are very long. And especially as you practice recalling your dreams, you can get really lost in the weeds going through too much detail. So I usually recommend just stick to the main points, the things that seem significant, and interpret those, get the big idea of what's being talked about, and then that will probably do you more good than spending an hour and a half going into exhaustive detail with the dream and stuff like that. So
Right.
hopefully that gave you a couple of tips on how you can recall your dreams, but also um, you know that we're all really going through this experience every night.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I have one more thing that I wanted to actually mention to you and see if you have come across this. And I don't remember the great details, but I remember quite a bit of it, of this particular story, that we didn't always sleep a full 8 hours, that people used to kind of go to bed when the sun went down, but then they would be up and what we consider, midnight, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, going and visiting neighbors and being up and then going back and then continuing to sleep again, until it was this. Then they would naturally wake up at sunrise and continue doing what they were doing. That
Hmm.
our pattern and the way we were sleeping, it got changed with the advent of these different street lights. And initially, I think it was what, candles, and then gas, and then we have street lights like they are today. And so, with now light being more prevalent and available for more longer social settings, then we changed it over to what we know now as the 8 hours sleep. And I thought it was really interesting, how they would, have entire gatherings. They're like going to sleep, wake up at midnight, and go over to a neighbor, talk. I don't know if they ate or what the custom was during that time, and then go back home. Have you heard of that before?
That's very interesting. I haven't heard of that before, and I'm curious where that research came from. Like, and how far back you're talking about? Are you talking about like 1,000 years, or
No, just
what
just
was?
before the advent of street lights, of
Okay.
lights, lights generally in cities, and in the way that we know them now.
Well, like I said, I haven't heard that before. However, what I would say is, just from my biology background, I could see how that could be the case, because if we just allowed our sleep cycle to attain a more natural rhythm, a lot of animals would sleep for a period of time and then they get up and prowl around and then go back to sleep and then get up and do stuff. So I could see where, we might have a similar cycle as that, because as I mentioned, I mean, we're in an animal body, so we would still have all those animal instincts and stuff there that we're
Okay.
working with, even though we've kind of taken mental dominance over those instincts in a lot of cases. Some of that could still be there. So yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of research in terms of putting people in a environment where they're not aware of like the outer cues that we normally get with daylight, for example. And so they found that the natural rhythm that people are on is closer to like a um, I don't remember the exact time, but it seems like it's maybe like a 29-hour day or something like that.
Hmm.
And they were doing these sensory deprivation experiences where they would be separated from the natural biological cues of the sunrise and sunset, and just allow people to get up when they were done sleeping and go back to sleep when they're ready to go back to sleep. And so yeah, it's kind of interesting if you look at those cycles that I could certainly see that happening, where people would get up and maybe go visit their neighbors. People do that now because people get up in the middle of the night and go down and get a snack. People talk about a midnight snack.
Right.
I'm not one of those people. I mean, I pretty much sleep through the night when I go to sleep. But yeah, people get up, they go downstairs, they have a snack, and sometimes if somebody else is down there who's kind of on the same cycle they are, they might talk for a while. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's some kind of evolutionary difference between people where some people are kind of more prone to that than others, but yeah, I could see that.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, Patrick, we have the question here from the 5D raver. And I think this is in
All right.
reference to Atlantis and souls, as we talked about before. It says, where does
Mhm.
he think these new souls come from then?
So that's what I was talking about before with the large population that we have now. I think there are probably a couple of things that are going on. One is that the um, the people who have been here the longest, I think there was probably maybe more of a gap in between lifetimes where we were kind of waiting for favorable circumstances to come in, and maybe we didn't always get to be as particular about the circumstances. Sometimes we may have just been looking for the first opportunity to get back, and so we just kind of first come first serve, so to speak. So I think that with the growth in the population, I think people can come back much faster. Where people are just coming in because there's all these different options. But I think there's also, with all this energy being given to this planet and all the evolution and the where we are with our technology and just all the opportunities for creativity and things like that, I think it's becoming a very attractive place for probably a lot of souls who maybe haven't come in and incarnate before. So I think those two things are probably going on, which accounts for the large population. But at the same time, I think we're kind of reaching a peak, and a lot of biologists and different scientists in different fields are all kind of coming to this conclusion that the peak carrying capacity for our planet is probably somewhere around 9 billion. And so once we reach 9 billion, there's probably going to be some environmental factors and different things that come into play that limit our growth beyond that point. And so, you look at some of those things that are just getting started, where it's probably going to create sort of a cap. And there's like these bacteria that are resistant to our antibiotics and stuff like that. That's just one of the many things that is probably going to create like a peak carrying capacity of the planet. So, I think there are some of those limits, and those limits are probably put in place on non-physical levels because maybe there is like a limit to the number of souls that are interacting with this planet. I know there's a lot of souls that are here that have never incarned or have not incarned in a while. And so they're sort of interacting on a non-physical level. And so there's all kinds of different players on different levels. And so um, we are physical. We're here, so obviously we're invested in the physical part of this experience. And there's people, like I said, they're sort of um, quasi-physical. They may come in periodically, but not as often. And then the ones who just don't come in at all. So that's, I think, hopefully that answers your question. I think that we're in some very interesting times. I mean, with the population being this high, I think we're in for some very interesting experiences. Lots of opportunities, though. That's the good news.
The next question is from Basil Sorbet. Says, often I experience music in my dreams. Could you speak to the symbology of music? Thank you.
Sure, sure. So music represents harmony that's occurring in our life, and I'm a musician. So musicians have an understanding of rhythm and tone and harmony. And so all those different things come into play. And so whatever images show up in our dream represent our mindset during the day. So if you're more focused on like the rhythm of life and the harmonies that are existing between like you and other people, and you like harmonizing with your different life experiences and all of that's all a musical type of experience. Now, as a contrast, somebody might be very strategic in the way they approach their life. So if they're very strategic, they might dream of their life being kind of like a game, maybe like chess. Or if they're very competitive, they might have dreams about playing sports, soccer or football, or, well, obviously, if outside of our country, soccer and football are the same thing. So, those things are very competitive, though, where like a team sport, like soccer, for example, you're into the teamwork and the competitiveness. Whereas if you're more solitary, you might do something like golf, where it's very skilled and nuanced, and you're kind of approaching your life more as like a lone wolf. You're out there, and it's you against the world. So you have all these things. So when you're looking at the type of game that you're playing, or in your case with the music, that is revealing how you use your consciousness. So if you look at how the music is, like, is it very inspiring, or is it um very soothing? What kind of effect does it have on you? And are you a musician? Are you playing the music so that indicates that you're very aware that you're a participant and a creator in that experience? Or are you receiving the music? You're just there and other people are playing. So it's still all you, like I talked about before. Everything in the dream represents an aspect of yourself. Unless it's a visitation, that's the only exception. And there are some ways to detect that. Like, for example, if the person is coming to you, but their lips aren't moving, and maybe they're just smiling, you can't hear anything, that's probably a visitation. Or if they're communicating with you telepathically, but their lips aren't moving, or they're just smiling, that's a sign that it's a visitation. You're actually in the dream with another entity. They're coming to visit you in that experience. But otherwise, every other person, they are you. And so if you walk in and there's a whole chamber orchestra playing, you are that orchestra. But since you're not the musician, you don't have as much of a conscious connection to creating that harmonious experience. But if you are a musician, like if you're in a band and you're playing or you're singing, you are very much more connected to your creative ability to create harmony in your life.
Okay. Well, Patrick, thank you very much again. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to me today. And for everyone else watching too, in the description below, there's the website. You have Patrick's books. And if you'd like to contact Patrick on the Intuitive School website, can they contact you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sure. We have contact forms where you can contact us at intuitiveschool.com, and also you can connect with us at spiritsjourneyradio.com.
Can you just go a little bit real quick about what it is that you teach at the school, to just give a little bit more information for everyone?
Sure. So we have classes in spiritual development where you can actually go through courses that help you train those abilities, like I was talking about before. The Owner's Manual for the Mind is like a textbook for the course, and some of the programs that we do. So, a lot of it is developing the fundamentals, the basics of being able to control your mind and be able to direct your mind the way you want. But then we get into more advanced abilities as you progress. Then there's also readings that we offer, and so that's more of a personal service experience where we have a past life reading, just like we were talking about before. And so we don't guarantee that you're going to get a reading from Atlantis every time you get a past life reading, though, because we ask for the most significant reading to your lifetime now. And so it will always be the most relevant to your current learning. It's what you most need to understand in terms of your current learning, where you are in your development. But then we also offer health readings. So that gets into the health of your spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical levels of your existence. And then it identifies anything that's a disorder that's going on, and also suggestions for how to correct that disorder so that you can lead the most healthy, productive life that you can. And then, like I mentioned, Catherine, she's more into the other kinds of intuitive readings like astrology, numerology, palmistry. She does rated iris analysis. And so probably astrology is the one that she does the most, but she gets more into that aspect, where I get more into like the energy healing and more like the higher like metaphysical development of the self and the evolution and things like that.
Okay, thank you. So everyone,
You're welcome.
visit the Intuitive School. You can contact Patrick there, check out his books. And Patrick, again, thank you very much. Stay tight. Stay tight, stay connected. Because I meant to say that a lot of times, sometimes when I don't cover this before we go online, basically the people say, okay, bye, and they hang up, and then there's a frozen image of you there. But yeah, everyone else watching, thank you. I appreciate you being here with us today. If you I guess tune in next week if you would like to do some sharing of your own stories for open lines. And then on Friday, we're going to have another guest. I don't know who that's going to be yet, but just hit subscribe button, hit the like button, and hopefully it will inform you whenever a new live stream goes up. So Patrick, again, thank you. Everyone watching, I appreciate it.
Anna.
And you guys have a good weekend.